Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, it's Rory from the Counselling Tutor Podcast, and with me in my existential adventures is my partner in therapy, Mr. Ken Kelly. Hi, Ken.
Hey,
how are you?
Oh, great, and great to be back here. I love that existential. I can't even say it. Existential.
Existential adventures, yeah.
Adventures. It's a tongue twister. Everybody try it. Try saying that 3 times.
Yes. And knowing what it means, that's the thing.
We've got a really action-packed episode, I guess, to bring you today. What are you going to be bringing in theory today, Rory? What are you going to be speaking about?
Well, I'm going to be talking about something that is something I'm feeling really passionate about, Ken, and it comes up so much in my trainings, and that is transference and countertransference.
It's a must. It's a must.
And I think if a therapist doesn't really understand the basis of transference and countertransference, then you can get into what my good friend and colleague Bob Cook calls a transferential mire. And I'll explain a little bit what that can be when we come to that part of the podcast, Ken.
Oh, I'm looking forward to that one. Skills today, we're going to be looking at paraphrasing. Paraphrasing, really, really important. It's a great skill, and I think often misunderstood. Paraphrasing is not just kind of summing up the story. There's a lot more to it than that. It's about really delving into the feelings. But again, I'll touch more on that when we get to the skills session. But you got something really interesting to kick us off today, which I guess falls into the category of personal development. And I know that it's certainly something we hear from our learners. They struggle with it. I know I struggled with it in my early counselling years, and maybe you can be able to relate to this. It's about turning down the volume.
Yeah, it's turning down the volume. And this is a question from Amanda in the Facebook feed. So if you're listening to this and you've not come to our website, counsellingtutor.com, then type in www.counsellingtutor.com. Remember, there's 2 L's in counselling. And if you go to the top right-hand part of the webpage, you click on the Facebook, and it's a invited group. Invite yourself in, we'll let you in, and you can join a whole host of students from all over the world who are interested in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. And myself and Ken sometimes come in and have a chat with people. And this is from Amanda. This question is from Amanda, who posted this question. And she said, how to switch off or turn down the volume, as Rory would say, from being a counsellor when talking to friends and family. I found I switch on my therapist head and listen for friends and family's incongruence in their stories. It would be nice just to have a chat over a coffee or wine without my other self joining us uninvited. And she finishes off by saying, any suggestions, welcome. So here are the suggestions. I think it's always the interesting thing. When anyone learns any new skill or any new kind of craft, there is a tendency for people to want to practice it. And it's the same. I've learned lots of skills over the years, and I think it's a human tendency to think, I'll have a go of that. The difficulty with using counselling skills with friends and family is they may not want it. I think that's the problem. I think that's the difficulty. And I'm going to share something from my own experience. I recently started working with a colleague at the college, and he was telling me just something about what had happened over the weekend. And I have a kind of habit of sitting and listening respectfully. So I'd sit in the chair and give the person my full contact, eye contact, and just give them the space to speak. And I do that as a general thing nowadays. And he looked at me and he said, I didn't realise we're having the full session today, Rory.
Yeah.
And there lies the problem. You know, sometimes people just want to talk about things without being particularly understood. They just want to talk about the everyday stuff that's going in their life.
And if we're debating this, which I guess this is what this is about, and I encourage you to take this into your group at your learning institution, or speak about it with your peers and debate it amongst yourselves, because it is an interesting topic. So we're debating this. You know, I'm a person-centered therapist, and Carl Rogers speaks about a way of being, not a way of doing. And that way of being kind of permeates who I am. I am a changed person as a result of doing my counselling training, and I do interact maybe differently than I would have before with friends and colleagues. And there is that danger that listening respectfully, as you say there, Rory, and maybe really giving them your full attention can be misinterpreted as, oh, I know what you're doing. I know what I've had this. I know what you're doing. You're looking into my mind now, and as if I had that power.
I thought you did. I thought you were a mind reader.
So I guess it's about recognizing that maybe there are parts of us that are different, and maybe people close to us, there may be an adjustment phase for them to get to know the new us. I know that I experienced immense personal growth during my studies and came out differently from that. I certainly wasn't actively trying to counsel people. And I guess where the issue might lie is when you yourself find yourself engaging in counseling techniques or methods within your interaction with others. As I think was brought up in the example, I would very much like to be able to switch it off or turn it down. And I guess that's about looking at self and looking at counselling is a very specific thing. And if you go back to level 2, it's the definition of counselling is that it is for the sole benefit of the client. It happens at a fixed time in a place. Both of you know why you're there. That is not true in a conversation with a friend. So if we find ourselves slipping in there, that's almost unethical. It's difficult to put in that word because it's a big word, but we're not there counselling. We're just having a chat, and they're not bringing stuff for us to process in a way that we would as a counsellor, I guess.
Absolutely, Ken. And I think it's quite interesting that this is something that happens a lot in training. It happened in my training because this is a whole new skill. Person-centered therapists rely on themselves as the therapeutic conduit. We rely on our way of being to help the client kickstart their organismic valuing process and start to value themselves. And interesting enough, Means and Thorne, writing Person-Centered Counselling in Action, which is, I've got quite an old copy, they were saying that sometimes people can start off by using the core conditions, and slowly but surely it kind of leaks into them. And it becomes an attitude that they take out into the wider world, not into the therapy room. What I do is I have a volume control. I have 3 volume controls. I've got a mixing desk just to my left-hand side. My volume controls are up and down as I make this broadcast. But I kind of turn it up and down, and I turn it up and down mainly for 2 reasons. One is my protection, because I don't want to be in a position where I'm totally in someone's frame of reference all the time, because I don't think that's a very, very healthy thing to do, because I think sometimes we need to kind of get into our own processes. And secondly, there are times when it's just not appropriate. And I'll share a story with you from my training group a long time ago, where I was asked this question: are you a counsellor all the time, Rory? And I said, no, I'm a counsellor when I'm practicing, and I bring those skills into the training environment. And the learner looked at me appalled, Ken, absolutely appalled. And she said to me, oh, Rory, I think you're harsh. I think you're harsh. And I said, why? She said, well, my friend who lives next door to me, she's a counsellor, and if anybody comes to her door, she will take them in and she will listen to them and hear them. And she's a counsellor all the time. And then she paused and looked up to the right. And then she said, mind you, she's had about 3 nervous breakdowns. And there lies the danger. You know, you're carrying a lot of stuff. So the volume control. And I kind of have my UPR set quite high. You know, one of the things that I've kind of learned as a therapist over the years is not to come to conclusions about people too quickly, because there's always another side of the story. Congruence is set, you know, usually midway. And empathy, it really depends on the situation. And I was driving to work the other day, and I was in the first lane in my small car doing about 60 miles an hour. And someone really took the front of my car off. They went from the second lane to the first, and he literally, if I hadn't have braked, nearly took the front of my car off. Ow. And they got a whole load of congruence. They got 0 empathy. And I have to say that unusually for me, I turned the UPR volume knob right to 0. I might have worded it.
I can really relate to that. And I guess you were fully within your own frame of reference, as opposed to the frame of reference of the person who may have hit into your car. And that's maybe a good checking point. Whose frame of reference are you in? Now, in a counselling situation, it's our job to be in the client's frame of reference, but it's not our job to be in somebody else's frame of reference in our everyday life. We've got our own life to live, and we have our own self-concept to live through, I guess. So have a look at whose frame of reference you're in. And again, if you find yourself being kind of tempted in to using those skills when somebody brings maybe a problem that they're having or something that they're struggling with, check yourself, because it isn't a counselling session, so therefore the client is not protected with a contract, with limitations in confidentiality and all that we kind of covered, I guess, in episode 1. Worth going back and having a look at that, where we spoke about contracting and that being there to protect the client. So it's about checking self and a kind of seeing where you're at and being in your frame of reference.
Absolutely. And your friends, they just want you as a friend. They don't, if they want a therapist, I would imagine they'll kind of find one. So sometimes friends don't want therapy. They just want someone to sound off to. So I would say to you, Amanda, just take it easy. Think about the volume controls. And, one of the things that my training's left me and the continuing work I do is that my UPR is pretty much set to quite a high level.
Yeah.
There's always two sides of the story, unless, of course, you're trying to force me off the road at 60 miles an hour.
I love it. And just kind of as we come to the end of this topic, have a think and speak to your peers, speak to fellow learners in your learning institution of what you might say if somebody hears that you're doing counselling as a course or that you are a counsellor in placement, if they try to kind of bait you in by bringing their problems, because that can happen. I know I guess if you're speaking to someone and you say, what do you do for a living? And they say, I'm a tax consultant. Well, there's a tendency to want to say, you know what, I got this car. Now, would it be cheaper if I leased it? And to ask them for their professional opinion.
Yes.
They would probably say, make an appointment, come and see me, and I'll send you an invoice. That's probably what they might say.
Yes.
But what might you say if somebody kind of tries to start bringing stuff to you that you feel is inappropriate and is bordering on seeing you as a counsellor as opposed to just a fellow human being or person within a friendship?
And just on a final note on that, I had someone I taught a few years ago, and she was a psychiatric nurse, and then she trained to be a counsellor, and she would tell everybody on holiday, her words, not mine, if anybody asked her what she did for a living, she said, I'm a secretary. That's what she'd say. I'm a secretary.
So you'll have a think and see what feels right for you. So leaving that behind and leaving with that for you to process and maybe discuss with your peers, we swiftly and move on to, I guess, theory today, where we're going to be looking at transference, countertransference, really important things. So over to theory with Rory.
Counselling Theory with Rory Lees-Oakes.
Are you a biological time machine? Come with me on a journey of discovery as we investigate the fascinating psychological aspects of transference and countertransference and how they relate to human interactions. An idea first put forward by Sigmund Freud, who believed that we bring aspects of past relationships into the here and now, a conclusion he came to after observing that his female patients had a tendency to fall in love with him. So first of all, let's define what transference is. Well, to quote Michael G. Connor of ChristlianCounselling.org, during transference, people turn into biological time machines. A nerve is struck when someone says or does something that reminds you of your past. This creates an emotional time warp that transfers your emotional past and your psychological needs into the present. Transference is largely a subconscious process, meaning that sometimes we are not aware of it or how it might impact on new relationships, such as working with a new client, colleague, or, as we'll see, a student. Secondly, it is the transferring of a relationship, not the person. Finally, it is at least partly inappropriate to the present, and only an aspect of the relationship, not the entire relationship, is transferred. So what does it look like? Well, many years ago, I was teaching a group of students. At the end of the class, all but one left. She approached me and asked, "Do I irritate you?" I took some time to think before asking, "Who do I remind you of?" She paused and thought for a few seconds before responding, My father. Tell me about him, I replied. She looked sad and a little frightened before answering. He was a big man. He had a loud laugh and told rubbish jokes. Now, for the listener who has never met me in the flesh, so to speak, this could be a description of myself, although I have to say my jokes are really funny. Well, I laugh at them. What else? I asked the student. She hesitated before responding. He belittled me, bullied me, hit me, said I irritated him. We both stood in silence, allowing the power of her words to sink in. The truth is, I was becoming irritated by her. In a few short weeks, she had gone from being a learner who engaged in class to one who avoided my questions with a childish response or just ignored me altogether. For a teacher, this can be extremely frustrating. So if she had not approached me that evening, I would have approached her to ask what was wrong. We both stood in the room looking at each other. I was the first to break the silence. Grab a chair and sit opposite me, I said. We both sat facing each other. I said to her, I'm not your father. I may look a bit like him, sound a bit like him, and as far as the jokes, well, the ice was broken. She smiled before breathing a sigh of relief. We both understood that she had transferred and projected some aspects of her past relationship on me, with all the attendant thoughts and feelings. Until I asked her who I reminded her of, this uncomfortable process was largely out of awareness, existing in her subconscious. So what about countertransference? Well, had I not been aware of the learner's change of behaviour towards me, I may have become visibly irritated and frustrated with her lack of engagement in class, becoming at least, in terms of irritation, the father she feared, counter-transferring my frustration onto her. Unchecked, this game could have gone on forever, or at least until one of us disconnected from the interaction. In the weeks that followed, she engaged with both the class and myself. I was no longer teaching the child who lived in fear of a father, but a grown woman who existed in the here and now. So what are the factors that increase transference? Well, a client who has a vulnerable personality and may rigidly project their expectations on the here and now. For example, of this may be a client who has difficulty accepting you're having a negotiated break for them, say a holiday, or a change in frequency of sessions. It could be a client who has lots of anxiety around his or her physical or psychological safety, someone who is afraid when they're sick or afraid. A client who has reduced opportunities for romantic interest, so that could be a client with Asperger's or maybe a client with learning difficulties. Also, long-term therapeutic engagements can also increase the possibility of client transference. So how do we manage it? Well, when we're managing transference, we recognise the importance of the relationship to the client. And here we're knowing and understanding that for the client, the relationship may be very, very important to them, and they're building an alliance with you, the counsellor. So being reliable, for example, keeping regular appointments, is really important. Maintaining professional boundaries and clear limits in therapy. Reflecting back to them what might be going on, but only when the client can understand and use it. For example, if the client is becoming too attached to you, asking the question, who do I remind you of, may highlight the transference. And also, and most importantly, working with both transference and countertransference in supervision. So if you feel there's some transference going on or countertransference, you're reacting to the client in a certain way, take it to supervision. So why do we recognise transference in supervision? Well, it supports you, the counsellor, by helping you understand what's going on in the relationship with your clients, so reducing your anxiety and over-responsibility. It improves ways to manage your client's emotional process by recognising wishes that are not clearly in the client's awareness. For example, a client who may feel romantically attracted to you, and you could also anticipate potential traps and potholes, such as a client being over-complimentary to you, helps avoid you acting out counter-transference and improves boundary maintenance. So it may be a client who is actively asking you out. That could happen. You know, where do you go in the evening? What kind of food do you like? Where do you live? May be innocent questions, but they also may be a sign of transference. Countertransference is largely feelings evoked in the counsellor by clients' transferential projections. These can be a useful guide to the client's expectations of the relationship. For example, a client who says you will never let me down may subconsciously projecting this belief onto you, the counsellor, when in reality they are accessing someone in their past, a parent figure or a past relationship maybe. Countertransference is easy to identify if your reaction to your client is not congruent with your personality and expectations of your role. For example, feeling very let down if a client misses an appointment, or maybe fantasizing about meeting the client in a setting other than counselling. Awareness of the transference-countertransference relationship allows reflection and thoughtful response rather than an unthinking reaction from you, the counsellor. And finally, let's not forget that transference is a two-way street. It is very possible that a counsellor may have strong feelings for their client. And just to normalise this a bit, Pope and Tabachnik in 1993 found that the vast majority of therapists, around 87%, had been sexually attracted to at least one, if not more, of their clients. This can lead to blurred boundaries and inappropriate self-disclosure on behalf of the therapist. So the next time you have a strong reaction to a person you have just met, ask yourself this question: what aspects of the person's behaviour is linked with a relationship in your past? Or as I asked my supervisees, who is this client to you? I hope you've enjoyed this theory to practice segment. I've included useful internet-based links in the show notes, which can be found at www.counsellingtutor.com. And don't forget, there's 2 L's in counselling.
Just listening to you sharing that theory, Rory, on transference, on countertransference, I'm recognizing the importance of that. If I'm to be a reflective, responsible practitioner, transference, countertransference is not something that is just nice to know. It's almost vital for me in my practice, specifically countertransference, because it can really hinder the relationship, if not, I guess, dare I say, damage the client's journey. So really important stuff there, and I'm very grateful that you shared that with us.
Well, thank you, Ken, and I'd agree with you. It's one of those very kind of sometimes undertaught areas in counselling, but so essential, and it comes up more than people think. So, skills with Ken. What have you got for us today, Ken? What are you going to be looking at in the terms of skills?
Counselling skills with Ken Kelly.
Today, I'd like to look at the skill of paraphrasing. So, if we look for a definition of paraphrasing, it's basically just repeating back your understanding of the material that has been brought by the client and using your own words to do that. It kind of reflects the essence of what has been said. If we were to look at paraphrasing, I guess we do it ourselves in everyday life. If you look at your studies to become a counsellor, a psychotherapist, you would paraphrase in class. Maybe your lecturer would bring a body of work and you'll sit and make notes, and those notes are going to be the paraphrase. It's going to be what you feel is important. It's almost as if you distill down the body of material that is brought into that is most important. Now that we have kind of an understanding or definition of what paraphrasing is, let's have a look at how that affects the client-counsellor relationship. So what does it do? What's it for? Why do we paraphrase? Well, first of all, the client will feel both heard and understood. The client brings their narrative, they bring their material, they dare to share that with you, and you show that you're listening, and you show that you're listening by kind of giving them a little portion of that back, that you feel is the important part of it. You paraphrase it down, and if that is done accurately and correctly and that matches where the client is going to recognize that. The client is going to feel heard. Finally, somebody is there really listening, really understanding what it is that I am bringing. Now, for me, this keys right into empathy. It really does, because it's about building that empathic relationship with the client. And empathy is not a one-way transaction. First, let's have a look at a definition of empathy. And we're going to look to Carl Rogers for a definition. And he uses to perceive the internal frame of reference of another with accuracy and with the emotional components and meanings which pertain thereunto, as if one was the person, but without ever losing the as if condition. In other words, we walk in somebody's shoes as if it was our reality, but of course it's not our reality, and that's where the as if comes in there. Now, here's the thing. Empathy is, as I mentioned, a two-way transaction. Empathic understanding, being 100% in a frame of reference and understanding the true feelings, is not the completion of the transaction. It needs to also be perceived by the client that you understand it. So empathy is only complete when the client feels at some level that they have been understood. There, the empathy circle is complete. So I'll give you an example of that. You may watch a film, and it may well be that within this film, there is an emotional part of the film where somebody in the film achieves something that is really spectacular, and you may find yourself moved for this person. You're almost there with them on this journey. And as they're receiving their award or their adulation, and the people are clapping their hands for what it is that they've done, you may even be emotionally moved to tears. So empathically are you connected to the material that you're experiencing. But here's the truth. The person that played in that film, or the person in that program that you may be watching, will not be able to perceive that. So therefore, the empathy is empty. It's one way. So empathy is only effective if the person bringing the material, your client, is able to feel that they are being heard, that they are being understood, that they can sense that there is that empathic connection. And using paraphrasing as a way of doing that, a way of letting them know that we see them, that we hear them. Paraphrasing also highlights issues by stating them more concisely. What is that? Well, that is focusing. It invites the client to go and delve deeper into part of that, to focus down. We can also use paraphrasing to check out the accuracy of our perception as a counsellor. So I'm going to give you an example now that we're going to go into where you'll notice that the client brought something. I used a paraphrase to kind of clarify my understanding of what was brought, and I actually asked for clarification to make sure that I was understanding that correctly. And watch how this affects the relationship, how the client takes that. It is a great fit for them, so they feel heard, they feel understood, and watch how the material deepens when this happens. So let's go into that simulated skill session right now.
I really have a battle with doing things for the impression that others will have of me, or the approval that I will get from other people for what it is that I do. So much so that I will very often override myself, my family, so that I can gain the acceptance, I guess, of other people, whether that be friends or family or clients, within in a work situation and all that. I will always favor what the action would be that would gain that acceptance, that would not bring up any sort of confrontation or maybe have a conflict situation arise from it. So I guess eager to please, wanting to make sure that all things are well and smooth and that I am liked and accepted with whatever the transaction or the situation may be.
As you're saying that, it kind of really feels like a lot of hard work. A lot of hard work in kind of preempting what it is that they would have expect of you, and then sacrificing, I guess, is a word that came up for me, your own wants, needs, to be able to meet that you perceive is expected of you. Have I understood that correctly?
Yeah, the word sacrifice really, really captures the feeling that comes up for me when I sort of reflect and look over that kind of setting. Is so often I would sacrifice my own wants and my own desire, or my own, if I just...
In the example that we've just listened to, the client really resonated with the word sacrifice. And that was my word. That wasn't the client's word. And it's very important to recognize that paraphrasing is putting your understanding of the essence that the client is bringing into your own words and presenting that to the client. Now, you saw within this transaction, in the simulated skill session, how valuable that word sacrifice was for the client. This client really felt understood. She really resonated with that word. It meant that I got it right. I was really there. That she was bringing was understood. Somebody heard her. And it's interesting to note that throughout the rest of this simulated session, that word of sacrifice becomes almost a theme. And it's interesting that that was my word put in, but it was actually the client's feeling because of a paraphrase. So when we think of paraphrasing, certainly when you read what it is in a textbook, that it's saying back to the client in your very own words what it is that they're bringing, it feels very simplistic. And there's often a tendency to paraphrase the narrative or the story that the client brings, but there's so much more to it than that. There's so much deeper that we can go. And in your skills sessions, in your simulated sessions, maybe in your college or learning institution, or if you are out there now and you are in placement, try to look for the full person within that paraphrasing. Try and look, what is their body language telling you? What are their facial expressions telling you? What is their way of being within that relationship telling you? In the last example, I used the word exhausting. That didn't even feature in what the client was bringing, but it did if you could see the client visually, because the client was presenting as beaten down, weighed down. The shoulders were heavy as she was bringing the material. So I was paraphrasing not only the words of the narrative, but digging deeper, looking for the feelings and paraphrasing the whole presence of that client within that relationship. And of course, this takes practice. So practice it within your simulated skill session. That's what they're there for. Play around with it, and of course, use your mobile phone, your smartphone, to record those and listen to them back. Listen to them with your peers and see how they are. Get feedback on your paraphrasing. Is it accurate? Does it hit the mark? Does it deepen the level with that client? We're going to look at another example of paraphrasing here. And in this one, try and see if you can kind of hear, as Rogers would put it, the music behind the words, where I'm looking deeper than just the words the client is bringing, paraphrasing back their whole being.
You know, out of my own will or my own free choice, I would put that aside and favor what would be the accepted, or in my perception, what I think someone else would rather I do, or the situation would rather play out as. And sometimes it's hard. It leaves me with I don't know. I guess I end up with that situation of I don't know if they actually really realize what it is that I sacrifice, that I gave up, so that it can fall into what I think would be favorable or what they would prefer in that situation.
Feels confusing to you in that situation of whether they even perceive what it is that you are sacrificing, what you're giving up, that you're giving up almost feels like part of yourself to match what you think that they may want or need from you. And I kind of got the feeling as you were saying that you wonder if they even see that.
Yeah. As I was sort of verbalizing and talking through that, I actually realized, even within that sacrifice, it's all my perception of what I think they might want me to do. And just saying that actually almost sounds a little bit ridiculous, because how am I to know what it is that they want or need to do? So here I am disregarding my own desires, for lack of a better word, but my own sort of what I would like to do and my own preferences to do something I assume someone else would want me to do instead.
For me, that was really interesting. In this simulated skills session, this client started off in what felt to me like an external locus of evaluation. She was wondering, confused and kind of stumbling over her words, whether they got her. So her perception was, do they get me? Do they know? Do they, external to myself, understand what it is that I'm giving up to meet their perceived expectations? That was followed by a paraphrase, and immediately after the paraphrase, this client had experienced a moment of movement from external to an internal locus of evaluation, where she was going, you know what? This is me. This is my perceptions. This is my responsibility. So she went from being powerless of, I wonder if they get it, and I wonder if they can understand, and it almost felt like they held the key to the change. And separated with one paraphrase, it was, and I think the word she used was, having verbalized this, I now see that. This is my responsibility. It is my perception. In other words, I've got the power and I have the ability to change this. Paraphrasing is so much more than just repeating the client's words back to them using your own words. There's real power in the paraphrase. Practice the paraphrase in your own simulated skills. Record them. Speak to your peers about your paraphrasing. Evaluate one another's paraphrasing. Look and see if you're getting empathic connection within your paraphrasing. See and search out those moments of movement within the paraphrase. What does it do for the client? What does it do for you as a counsellor? This is definitely something that should be debated, and hopefully you'll go out with a new passion, a new way of looking at paraphrasing.
Well, Ken, really, really good segment from you there. Really understand the importance of paraphrasing, and I'm sure the people who are listening are going to get a real handle on why paraphrasing. Did I say paraphrasing? I think I did. Paraphrasing is so important. And now we're going to move into another segment called Ask Ken and Rory, and we've got a post again from the Facebook feed. So if you want to come and see us on the Facebook, if you've not come and seen our little community, then go to www.counsellingtutor.com. That's 2 L's in counselling. And on the right-hand side, you'll see Facebook. And if you hit it, we've got a little closed group with lots of members who are training or interested in counselling, some who are qualified. And we sometimes get people to ask questions. And today we're going to answer one. And today's question is, I'm struggling with the non-judgmental thing, in that I understand that it is so important, but all I seem to be doing is becoming aware of my own judgments and then feeling guilty about them.
Yeah.
Dear. What's a typical personal journey in this area? How do you come to that acceptance of yourself and then moving beyond to this new point of view? I appreciate this may just be my personal issue, but any insight would be helpful. And I'm on the level 2 cert, by the way. So I think that kind of gives us a clue. The person who wrote this is quite clearly on the beginning of their learning journey, Ken.
Yeah, and it's a big thank you to Karen for that question. And if you have a question, just pop it in the Facebook group and we'll pick it up in Ask Rory and Ken. So I guess the first thing here is this is not the first time I'm hearing this, and I'm sure it's not the first time you're hearing it, Rory.
Absolutely not.
We're looking at that. What we're told, at least in the person-centered approach to counselling, is that unconditional positive regard is necessary. So if it's one of those core conditions which we recognize as necessary and sufficient, it's necessary for it to be there. Yet I think what Karen is saying is, how do you put aside your judgments that you have, and that she's now wrestling with this and feeling an element of guilt with it. And I think that the first thing is to look at what UPR really is. UPR is most certainly not saying that we will agree with anything the client brings, no matter what it is.
Absolutely, Ken. So I think that's really, really, really useful. And in my class, I always talk about separating the sin from the sinner.
Yeah.
So, we see people as human beings, and we have to remember that within the theory, Rogers believed that everybody was born basically good, and that any movement away from that was a distortion of the natural human condition. Now, there's plenty of people who've argued against that through the years, but generally speaking, sometimes people make very, very kind of unwise decisions or unwise actions which can impact on other people. But as therapists, we're interested in them, not really what they've done. So that's the first thing, separating the sin from the sinner. So people may very well tell you about things they've done, and certainly as a practicing therapist, people have told me some things that are really quite unacceptable.
Yep.
And they've asked me what my view is, and being real and congruent, I've said, well, I certainly wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
But I'd follow that up by saying, but this is about you. Where are you with that? So it's not about agreeing. That's the first thing, isn't it? It's not about agreeing with everything the client's done and kind of colluding with them. It's about just accepting that people do things that can get them into a lot of trouble or maybe against our values, which are two different things, because our values are, not always the law.
Yeah.
So
very much so.
So it's about seeing the person. And a way through that is one of the things that was really helpful to me. I came across maybe late in my practice was Terence. He was a playwright of the Greek and the Romans, and he wrote in Latin, but I'm not going to pronounce the Latin because I can't. I am human, nothing human is alien to me. And what I carry around with me is the fact that the person sat in front of me is a human, no different to me. And the only thing that makes their situation different maybe is the choices they've made. And some of those choices may not be great choices, but underneath it, they're still human. And that's been a great help to me through the years, Ken.
It is. And unconditional positive regard, if you want to read about it, read Rogers's book, A Way of Being. There's a really beautiful description of unconditional positive regard in that book. And I'm not going to go into that. That's a book that if it's not on your shelf, get on Amazon now and buy it and put it on your shelf, because it should be there. It's a really great book.
It's a good book.
But what we're looking at here is basically self-concept. And if you know the theory of self-concept is that each one of us is a product of growing up, our culture, our beliefs that we came up against as we were growing up, that our primary care givers gave us. So we see the world not as the world is, but as we are, based on our belief sets, our culture, and all that makes us up. But if that is true, then surely somebody else who is not us will have their own way that they look at the world, and it'll be their truth based on their upbringing and their culture and what they kind of experienced. Their behaviors will be dictated by that. So we all look at the world differently because we're looking at the world and projecting who we are on it. So if we look to our own self-structure, who we are, and we realize that we see is not necessarily truth, it is only our truth, and that somebody else can hold a truth that may be different to ours, that is their truth, then we don't need to judge them. It is their truth and they are welcome to it. We look to them with unconditional positive regard for what they see and how they see it. It's not our job to change that. That is who they are. And to put this in, I guess, look at the pointy end of this, is that this is what takes people to war. You will have two warring factors coming together, both of them because of the truth that they know to be the unshakable truth. And there's a really it's like a little comic that's got the Crusaders on their horses with the swords, and they're now going into battle. And the one person is saying, "My ridiculous lies are much more valid than your ridiculous lies," and they're now going to go and die for this that they believe as truth. So I've got a video that I made on self-concept, which I will gladly pop into the show notes as well. You can go and have a look at that. It's about 15 minutes, and it really examines self-concept linked into UPR and what unconditional positive regard is. But it's, again, just going full circle to the end of this, it's not about agreeing with everything that somebody brings, because sometimes the things are not, they're not going to fit.
Absolutely. And also I'd say, have a think about your timeline. Where did you get your values from? Where did you pick them up from? What influences did you have around you? And maybe this might, for the person who wrote this might be a unique opportunity to reassess your value set, to say, what I believe to be absolutely true, is it? One of the wonderful things about counselling training, it's rather like taking the blindfold off. We begin to see that there are many other realities in the world, and sometimes our own, as Ken alluded to, are not the reality. They are a reality.
Wow, that is powerful. It's like, if you haven't seen the film The Matrix, go and see it, because it's just cool. You see, that's my reality. I love it. I love sci-fi. And Morpheus sits with two pills. It's a red pill. and a blue pill.
Yes.
And he says to Neo, you can take take the blue pill, and you'll wake up tomorrow and things will just be as they were and you won't even remember what happened. But if you take the red pill, you will see things how they really, truly are. And for me, counselling training was that pill. I got to see the world how it was. And I remember how it was actually devastating to me when I realized that I knew as truth started crumbling around me.
Yeah. Yes. So it's going to be, if you continue on your journey, then you will almost certainly begin to challenge those truths that you know to believe true. And some of them will remain truths. Some of them will be, no, I'm not changing my view on this. And others may be, well, maybe I didn't understand that. Maybe I didn't see it from this. And to finish off on the matrix idea, counselling, you never know how far down the rabbit hole you'll go.
Oh, I love it. I do love it. So if you've got a question and you want to ask Rory and Ken, the way to do that is just pop on our Facebook group and go and pop it in there. There's a thread that's called Ask Rory and Ken. We can't obviously get back to everyone, but we will pick one, at least one, every week, and we'll come back to you with our thoughts and feelings on that. And it's, I guess, not the truth. It's just our truths. It's just our debate. So go and speak about this with your peers as well. And see.
Which reminds me, Ken.
Yeah,
when we put this podcast on the Facebook feed,
yes,
why not have some people feeding back and tell us what they think? I think that would be really useful.
100%. We want to hear what you think of this podcast. Is it useful? And the best way to do that is to actually pop on over to iTunes and leave us a review. We love your reviews. Please.
Yes, please.
We do. And the reason that we asked you to do that, it'll take less than 5 minutes of your time. It makes a big difference for us. It makes it feel like it's worthwhile us getting up extra early to meet to do these podcasts.
Doing without a tea. Doing without another tea.
And so we would really appreciate your feedback on iTunes. Let us know what you think. And of course, go on to the show notes page. Every episode of the podcast, this is episode number 3. You go over to counsellingtutor.com. It's counselling spelt the British way. So it's double L, as Rory alluded to earlier.com. Go on and go to episode 3 in the podcast tab and go and leave your feedback on the show notes page. Right at the bottom, first of all, you'll get the video we've just spoken about on self-concept. You'll get all the show notes from today's episode, beautifully laid out there that you can kind of go to, refer to it when you're doing your assignments if you wish to. They're all written out there for you, but it's definitely worth visiting the site and leave your comments at the bottom there. We would love to hear from you.
Absolutely. Okay, Ken. Well, I guess that winds up this part of the segment.
Yeah. And that kind of brings us to the end of this episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. We hope that you've got something from it, and I look forward to being with you again in episode 4.
Yeah, looking forward to that. So from us, cheerio.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.